All right. Welcome everyone to this month's monthly National Equine Health Call. Thank you for all joining us today. I remind everybody that we will have our next call on August 8th. And I appreciate any suggestions or topic ideas, whether it's topic or speakers. And today we are going to get started with a presentation from Texas from Dr. Brian Boyle. Sorry, Brian, for messing up your name.
It's bold.
Bold, thank you. We are going to get an update on some EIA cases from the Texas perspective. So thank you. Take it away.
I'm going to share my screen. Tell me you can see things here. Hold on. Give me a minute. Can you see my PowerPoint there?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. First off, I saw her come on the call. I want to thank Dr. Belzell McCluskey, Angela. She's a great asset to us here in Texas, and we've worked with her for years relative to a lot of these cases. And she's a Texas native, which is good. Try to get her to come back, but she can't take the heat anymore. But and I see a lot of friendly faces like Steve Velasco. I'm actually sitting in his office today as we speak. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Bowl. I am the Director of Field Operations. I recently came back to the Texas Animal Health Commission in February. And Texas is very active with to some of these regulatory equine diseases, EIA and pyro in particular. So I'm going to go over a quick case that we recently got with respect to EIA in Houston. And then I have several slides here that are kind of quick summaries of regulatory EIA positives and pyro positive cases that we've had here in Texas. So we'll go ahead and get started. So basically, this is a case about a positive bush track sanctioned racing stable, quarter horse stable in Houston, Northwest Houston. And I was sitting in Austin at the main central office, and we do not currently have a permanent veterinarian in our Giddings region, which is where Houston would fall under. And I got I think it was around 6 o'clock in the afternoon on the 2nd of May, I got an AGID positive from TVMDL, ELISA and AGID positive. And based on talking to the veterinarian, the history, I knew it was stable. So the next morning, and of course, that sample was being forwarded to NVSL confirmation. That sample was taken on the 29th of April. So we were informed by TVMDL on the 2nd of May. The next morning, myself and the region manager went to that facility in Houston, kind of showed up, didn't give them a lot of notice. We don't usually do that, but we do that a lot of times when we have high risk facilities, and we consider this due to the fact that it was a racing stable and there was a high probability that bush tracks were involved, that we went ahead and kind of showed up. And I tested 28 horses on that date for EIA and pyro. And the owner of the premises was actually very cooperative and a pretty straightforward guy. And he had a long history of racing on tracks. And the reason these horses were initially tested, or his horse, the positive horse, was to meet racing requirements for Sam Houston race park. Anyway, so we tested 28 horses there, and we received the confirmation from the accredited vet sample on the 9th, and then our samples on the same day. So in addition to the initial index positive, we found 12 more EIA positives from our testing. And basically, the owner, again, that owned the facility, he had mainly sanctioned horses that were running on, or horses that were running on sanctioned tracks. And he leased out the other stalls that he had to bush track kind of people. And a lot of these horses that I tested, the 12 positives, were under the bush track trainer. Actually, some of these horses we did find out later are owned by the same individual that owned property. So we got confirmation on our samples, on all of the samples on the 10th, so for the pyro as well. So we didn't, that was a Friday if I'm not mistaken, and we didn't let him know until we showed up again on the 13th. And I wanted to make sure we didn't have any horses fleeing. So I brought microchips with me, and there was discussion about whether we were going to brand horses or not. And I started microchipping horses, and we gave him the quarantine at that time. In Texas, we usually initially put hold orders on suspects, and then we quarantine them, once we get confirmation. And when I got there, so this is a quasi-rural property there in Houston that has, backed up to a park, and there were two feral donkeys way back in the woods that they elected to euthanize that day. And then there were 4 additional horses that somehow showed up that we didn't test the first time. And one of the 4 additional horses that we tested on the 13th of May, they elected to euthanize that horse prior to the test result. And it was kind of a horse with bad feet that had been dropped off there. Those 4 additional horses that we tested came back negative for pyro and EIA on the 17th and 21st of May. They elected to euthanize the 13 horses after I microchipped them. So I guess I wasted a bunch of microchips, but that might have maybe driven the point home that that they shouldn't run with these horses. So and the owner again of the facility, I think he's trying to do right. I think he was honest and straightforward, and I think basically the way these horses got infected was through iatrogenic transmission, reusing IV bags, blood doping, probably we don't probably know how long EIA stays in multi-dose bottles, but multi-dose bottles, etc. And so we tried to educate us while we were there. Kind of a sad situation to have that many horses put down, 13 total. But the index horse in general, that horse had run on Sam Houston Race Park back in 23. And that horse tested negative for both EIA and pyro on the 23rd. And horse got injured and had a bone chip removed in December of 2023. So I suspect that horse got infected, likely during training or possibly even at the track. We don't know. We asked about trace outs. There were 3 mares that were in Louisiana, brood mares, that the owner of the facility had, and they were tested by that trace information was given to Dr. Pelzel and Louisiana, and they tested those horses negative for both diseases in Louisiana. So, and then of course you asked the bush track trainer guy that was there. He doesn't go to the track, but he kind of does the leasing. He trains them there on the facility. He said nothing's left in the past 6 months, but it's really hard to verify. And we're going to be doing the 60-day retest on Monday for the EIA exposed horses that are left. So that's kind of that case. And then back in March of this year, we were contacted through the USDA about an EIA suspect horse that went from Texas to Connecticut with no CVI or testing. It arrived in Connecticut in January of 2024 and was sampled by an accredited veterinarian in February of 24 and confirmed a positive for EIA in March of 24. When the Connecticut owner was contacted, she was on her way back. She was on her way back to Texas or to the All-American, and we sent her back with the exposed horses she had in her trailer. I think we actually caught her in Oklahoma. Dr. Hall, I'm pretty certain, was involved. We sent her back to Connecticut to be tested by Connecticut with exposure there. The actual Central Texas seller had no more horses. Supposedly, the individual bought the horse originally in the Texas Panhandle. We contacted the Panhandle seller, worked at a feedlot up there. He had no more horses, and he bought them from a guy, unknown seller, in a parking lot up there with no testing. So the saga continues. And then the USDA informed us in May 7th of this year of this is a Wyoming horse that originally came from Texas that USDA informed us in May 7th that this horse was a suspect on accredited vet sample. That sample was taken in the horse roughly arrived in April this year, and it was confirmed positive by the accredited vet sample that was taken in April and confirmed positive in early May of this year. And then when the state of Wyoming did their regulatory sample, the horse was actually positive for both diseases, both pyro and EIA, which unfortunately we're seeing a lot of that with respect to these horses, these quarter horses, especially due to iatrogenic transmission. This horse was sold to Wyoming by a celebrity roper, and it was kind of one of those deals where he never really rode the horse. He purchased it, fairly recently from some East Texas ropers, and all the exposed horses we've tested so far have been negative, and we're pending a 60-day retest. The East Texas folks that the celebrity roper bought the horse from recently, and we tested their horses, and they were negative for both diseases. And the guys from East Texas bought it from an individual in New Mexico, and that trace was sent to New Mexico, and New Mexico tested the origin premises there, and they were negative for both diseases. So you can see this starts to become a tangled web of connections here. And then on the 20th of May of this year, accredited vet out of New Mexico that has an in-house EIA lab contacted Texas Animal Health Commission about an EIA suspect that turned up positive very quickly on the ELISA test, and the horse, according to the accredited veterinarian, was clinical jaundice and anemic, and we confirmed that sample on the 23rd of May. We took our regulatory sample on the 23rd as well, and it was confirmed positive on May 31st for EIA. This led us to a bush track outside of El Paso, and we tested 23 more head on the 31st and confirmed 5 more EIA positives on the 7th of June. These horses have subsequently been isolated on a different premises and all branded with a 74A, and they're isolated at a separate location. We're very concerned about these horses possibly fleeing or being moved illegally. We were out there last week, and the horses are still there. And the brush track again, or bush track, is pending a 60-day retest. There is some talk about euthanizing these horses, but there's significant ties with Mexico and people that you probably don't want to mess with, especially on some of those horses. And so the guy that is kind of the overseer of these horses is kind of in a tough situation with respect to what to do with these horses. So they've all been branded. We have them under quarantine, and they've been isolated. We suspect, again, movements between Mexico and Texas, illegal movements, and then illegal movements between New Mexico and or Mexico and Texas, New Mexico and Texas. So we suspect a lot of ties back to both of those, the country of New Mexico, or country of Mexico, and the state of New Mexico with respect to illegal movements into Texas. So, and this is kind of this last slide just talks about the porous nature of the Texas-Mexico border and confiscated horses. Our compliance department with the Texas Animal Health Commission has really done a good job. We beefed up our compliance personnel, and they're talking to a lot of the local sheriffs and the USDA. We're working cooperatively with the USDA at the ports, and a lot of these county sheriffs out there in West Texas are confiscating horses suspected of being smuggled. And we had horses that were confiscated in March of this year that were confirmed, 2 horses that were, one of them was confirmed as EIA positive in April, tested by the USDA. May of 2024. These were actually stray horses that the Cattle Fever Tick Eradication Program down in Hidalgo County found, and they had 14 Mexico strays. And we had in June, when they were tested, 13 of 14 were positive for pyroplasmosis T. equi. And in June, 4 more horses were confiscated by some border county sheriff's departments there in West Texas. And 2 of the 4 horses that were confiscated were pyro positive, 1 a T. equi, 1 a B. cabali. And here as recent as July, 8 horses confiscated again by West Texas Sheriff's Department. And I think they had maybe some illegals in the trailer with the horses. They confiscated the trailer, the truck, the horses, and they were tested by the USDA again and confirmed positive for a T. equi. 3 of the 8 were confirmed positive. So I think what we're having here is there's a lot of smuggled horses, a lot of horses that are being raced in Mexico, and they're bringing them across over here, and the good ones are ending up over here, and they're doing the same activities they're always doing, reusing IV equipment, needles, and blood doping. And I could fill out some more slides too. We had some of these horses, if looks like a good cow horse, maybe not a good race horse, they end up becoming roping horses. And we've had cases, recent cases in South Texas and some other areas where I suspect some of these horses may have come originally from Mexico or associated with Mexican horses and trainers that have led to some more positive horses. So we got a lot of activity here in Texas. I think just in a short amount of time here, we've probably seen more than a lot of other states see in 5 years. So does anybody have any questions relative to this?
Hey, Brian, it's Velasco. On those 14
What was your name again?
Can you hear me? It's Velasco.
I'm just kidding. All right, Steve, what's up?
Can you, on those 14 from Hidalgo County, or is there evidence that those were possibly bush track horses, or is that possibly natural infection?
I can't tell you 100%. I think these were true strays, but they could have been bush track or brush track, whatever you want to call them. I think there's always a possibility of that. But
so these were Appaloosas, Brian. We had a real close look at those, Velasco. It's a great question, and I was worried actually about this group possibly being assembled to smuggle, by one of our exporters, right? Because they're pre-testing the horses in Mexico, and they're really deciding who to present legally, who's going to pass the USDA testing for import, and who needs to be smuggled across. They all get here anyway, is kind of what we know, right? So I was concerned that this might have been a group that was specifically put together to smuggle, but it really was not. These were a hodgepodge of what looks like long-term herd horses that were naturally infected. They were hard to catch. They were hard to test. They really weren't broke to do anything. And most of this herd was actually Appaloosas and had no athletic training or ability to them. So kind of an interesting case, but that one does look like a long-term exposure to ticks in Mexico in a natural infection situation. But great question, because we were really worried about, why we had so many in that herd.
Very good. Thank you both.
Thanks for the information. I didn't have all that, but like Dr. Pelzel was saying, these horses are coming across, whether, they're pre-screening them, and whether they're coming across legally, illegally, they're still coming across. And, this culture of coming across illegally is been going on for way longer than I've been alive. But, with the iatrogenic transmission, we've really sped up our transmission of disease on these horses for sure. I mean, I've been dealing with pyro for a long time in EIA, and Angela, you might be able to speak to this. I can't remember seeing this many positives in such a short amount of time.
It's a lot. I agree with you, Brian. It's been really active there on the border. You know, my hope is that perhaps we've got a lot more partners. You know, the work you guys have been doing with Texas Animal Health Commission and USDA on the border recently in making those more local connections and communicating what better with some of our other law enforcement agencies that are there beyond just Border Patrol. You know, I think some of those connections is starting to yield some fruit here because, you know, the communication has been better. I think the sharing of information, what, you know, they're starting to call us when they intercept something weird like this. And we're starting to get the message out that, you know, these are things that we have to intercept, we have to test, we have to put them in the pens, and we have to deal with them. And I think that message is spreading further than it used to, and we're getting some good partnership in doing that. That's my hope. But I think I think this is a constant daily pressure from the South. That's something we've been seeing for years, but I'm really excited about the collaboration on the border lately from multiple agencies, and our ability to actually get these caught and tested and dealt with. Obviously, it's just the tip of the iceberg what we can catch, but I'm happy that we've got some better work going on.
I mean, one of our intents too, with the increased compliance staff that we have, and we've got some very experienced folks that have dealt with these equine diseases for quite some time, and Angela knows who I'm talking about. But we're going to go into some of these stables now, and you know, we have on our rules, you know, if they're involved in racing, they have to have a negative test for both EIA and Pyro. So we're going to start going into these stables and asking for that and making them test, and I'm sure we're going to bring up more of these. So. Any other questions?
No, I
Thanks, Brian.
Good job, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. We're going to have to move on in our agenda. As we transition to Dr. Martin Nielsen, he's going to give us an update on the AAEP parasitic guidelines. Dr. Nielsen, can you unmute, and are you going to want to share screen? There you go.
Yes. All right, you can see it?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Okay, so as I hope that, you know, most of you are aware, is that we have this document with AAEP that's been around since 2012 when it was published the first time. I've been the chair of the task force and lead author of the various different versions of this document over the years. And we just published a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, the 2024 version. And I want to say that this is the most substantial revision that we've done. I want to characterize this as a complete overhaul. The document is available on the AAP website with all the other guideline documents. And so I can, you know, recommend that you go on there and download it for all the detail. I'm just going to give you a brief overview in the interest of time. I think the biggest reason for going ahead with these revisions was this particular document that was published last year in 2023. So the WAAVP is the World Association for the Advancement of Veterinary Parasitology, and that's the organization that oversees all guidelines as they relate to veterinary parasitology. And this document, you will probably recognize a couple of the authors. I'm one of them. Dr. Ray Kaplan is the lead author. This document was about 12 years underway to really come up with some solid instructions for how to perform the fecal egg count reduction test, which is the test we have for testing for drug resistance in helminth parasites. So we really didn't have anything before, and we now have these guidelines, and we made sure to update the AAEP guidelines to be in compliance and follow this new guidance. This document obviously has a lot more detail and also has instructions for all other livestock species and their parasites. So what's new in the equine AAEP guidelines? Well, first of all, we've expanded the background section a little bit to also include some information about some parasites that weren't represented before. Specifically, we now have some information on, for example, Onchocerca cervicalis, also referred to as the neck threadworm. As some of you may have heard about, there are lots of claims out there, unfounded claims about this parasite and what it might do and what it might not do, and also how to possibly treat it or not. So this is one that's been included. Some of the other ones have also been included and or expanded, so that we're not only focusing on the three big ones, which are strong jowls, tapeworms, and ascarids. As you pull down the document, download it, and start looking at it, I hope that you'll notice and appreciate these gray boxes that are placed and scattered over the course of the document. One thing we've been criticized for, and I think rightfully so, is that the paper is a little dense and it might not be the most reader friendly for a busy practitioner out there in the field who just wants a simple answer to a question that they have. Now, any guideline paper does have to provide the updated knowledge and background information. Otherwise, you can't provide the guidance. So it's always a happy median between not making it a textbook chapter or even a whole textbook, but also not making it so brief that it is not really to be understood why this guidance is given. So what we have is these boxes. So if you're busy or you don't want to read a dense document, you don't feel like it, you can start by just going through the document and look at those gray boxes. They will provide you with the take-home messages, but also some brief and quick how to do this and how to do that step by step. So read the text boxes first, and if you're left with, oh, I wonder why they say this, then read the chapter. So that's the whole idea. You just see a couple examples here. We have some things we just really felt like we had to drive home. These are things we've said for years, but we must admit that we might not have been too effective in getting our messages across. And we have so many misconceptions about so many things when it comes to parasitology, especially how to interpret fecal egg counts. So here's just an example of 3 bullet points. What can you use fecal egg counts for, and what can you definitely not use them for? So hopefully this will be found useful. Now, we also have updated information on the current findings of drug resistance in equine parasites, and this table has been expanded compared to previous versions simply because we have more parasites now showing up with resistance or signs of resistance. We used to only focus on the cyathostomins and the ascarids. Now we have to include pinworms and actually most recently tapeworms, which is very concerning. We're seeing early indications of total treatment failure against equine tapeworms, and we're concerned that this is going to become a global phenomenon very quickly. This is what we've seen with the other types of resistance, so that is what we expect also here. Now, we don't have anything new in the pipeline, so we have what we have, and it's slowly getting worse and worse. We're really losing efficacy, and we do have examples of total treatment failure in small strong jowls, cythostomin parasites. And the big take-home message of these guidelines is you need to test. You need to test the efficacy of these treatments if you, as the veterinarian, are going to make any recommendations to this client as to which products to use for what parasites. There's no way around it. The ERPs, so the strong jowl egg reappearance periods, we've recently summarized the entire body of scientific literature, and that's also a publication you can read. Happy to share that if you would like. Big picture here is that they're not what they used to be. For ivermectin, moxidectin, we used to have these long egg reappearance periods. So that's the number of weeks it takes for egg counts to come back positive following treatment. And there used to also be a substantial difference between ivermectin and moxidectin. Nowadays, that difference is gone completely. We see them performing pretty much alike when it comes to anthelmintic performance and treatment efficacy. And we've also seen the egg reappearance periods come down substantially to be about a month. And that is something that is not just published in the States, also outside of this country. There's also a section on the whole concept of larvicidal efficacy. That's also getting worse and seems to be for both of the 2 products that we have. Resistance has clearly been documented for the 5-day regimen of fenbendazole in several studies. We've also documented that for moxidectin, we never really had a high efficacy against these encysted larvae. And so the 2 products are, moderate in their efficacy level at best. So new concept with the guidelines is to consider how many parasite eggs you are counting. That might sound like a very logical thing, but what we mean here is not what the APG is, the number of eggs per gram, but actually how many eggs are you physically counting with the technique that you're using. So the multiplication factor of the technique is what comes into play here. So you see X number of eggs under the microscope, but then there's this multiplication factor, the conversion factor, that then converts that into X per gram. So if you have a technique that has a very high multiplication factor, this is exemplified here on the left. We have 100 EPG, but we're only counting 4 different eggs. You know, we may have a decent egg count, but only 4 statistical units. It gets difficult to determine whether or not there's a reduction or reduced reduction afterwards. If you, on the other hand, are using a technique that has a much lower multiplication factor, you are counting much more eggs, you have a much better resolution of your data, and then you can have a much more reliable test. So the other way I like to think of this is, you know, the resolution is my keyword here. So here's a good high resolution picture. We can recognize 6 different strongyl eggs, and it's easy, and we can trust what we see. If we're using a technique that doesn't have that resolution, it gets a little bit worse. But if we squint, we might still convince ourselves that we can see 6 eggs, but you know, maybe we're not as certain because it could also be other objects. It's getting a little bit harder. And then of course, if you go to a really poor technique, who knows what we're doing? And that's what I mean when I talk about the number of eggs counted determining the resolution of our resistance tests. So we defined 2 thresholds. I'll spare you the details today. I'm happy to explain this further to anyone who would like. But in the interest of time, and I'm going to get into the details, there's a statistical justification and background behind these, but we have an upper and a lower efficacy threshold for each anthelmintic class against each parasite of interest. And then the interpretation as to resistance classification is based on how the data fall between or above or below these 2 thresholds. So point being here for strongyls as an example for the 3 drug classes that, you know, those thresholds are not identical. They are different because these classes had different efficacy levels to begin with. And you need to take that into account. So this is new. We used to just operate with the same pretty much for all classes. So different thresholds depending on which class you're testing. And that will have ramifications for the recommended group size. And also the thing I talked about before, how many eggs you should count in your group pre-treatment. And as you can see, some of those numbers are a little bit different. It gets easier when we look at the aspirates because the thresholds are all the same. The efficacy levels of these classes were pretty much the same before resistance developed. So the thresholds are the same, and therefore also the group size and eggs counted recommendations. Another new aspect that we have in the guidelines are these climates that, you know, are different throughout this country, yet alone throughout the world. But focusing on this country, we have these computer simulation outputs that are based on weather station data. And we just provide some examples. These are different states in the US. And what we're looking at here is the percent development of strongyl egg to infective 3rd larval stage. And by that, we can actually sort of look at, okay, what are the transmission seasons in these different climates? So we have North Dakota in A, for example. We compare that to Lexington, Kentucky in B, and you can see that there's a longer transmission season here in Kentucky than we have up north. Then we have Georgia, Texas, Florida, and then we have Nevada. And so different climates, different dynamics, different considerations as to when someone should consider even deworming, if at all, and then also testing. So much more detail in the guidelines. And then finally, we do have specific guidance per age group. And for the first time, we have a little section on senior horses, because that's another topic that we get a lot of questions about. That's it. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to entertain any if you might have some.
Yes, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute or put your questions in the chat.
It was loud and clear. I don't believe that.
Well, I strongly encourage folks to actually take a look at the document. As Dr. Nielsen said, there are boxes in there that would like to give us some brief descriptions and good pointers rather than reading the entire document. I agree with that statement. And we do have one in the chat. Did you see that?
Let me see if I can look that up. I felt like I saw it, but now it
I
disappeared.
can read it. I can read it to you.
Okay.
Fecal flotation would seem to be a very primitive and sometimes crude technique. Where are we with the availability of assessment techniques using more advanced technology, i.e. DNA analysis, qPCR, etc.?
So, so the DNA analysis, qPCR, et cetera, has been evaluated and studied, and my lab has been part of that. The issue is that it doesn't really provide a better solution because we're still dependent upon detecting the eggs in the feces, because that's where the DNA is, right? So now you're just adding an extra layer, which is the DNA extraction. You need to get the DNA out of the fecal sample. You also need to separate the fecal matter from the DNA, because we have a lot of PCR inhibitors within fecal matter. And so you're adding a number of variables that, you know, just makes it more complicated and perhaps even more variable in terms of data. And then it's hard to quantify. So the PCR approach is not it. It's not going to do it for us. What we've seen in recent years, and my lab has been part of this, but there's now a number of different platforms out there commercially, is automated egg counters. So these are image analysis based, and there are artificial intelligence based devices that can count samples based on images or video recordings of a sample, and then provide a better and more reliable estimate, because you remove a lot of the variability, because a lot of the variability in these data actually comes back to the person who sits by the microscope. You know, there's human error, and you get tired or you get distracted. And if you've done egg counts an entire day, you might not be as efficient at it at the end of the day as you are starting out. So that factor can be removed, and you have a much more standardized system that sort of does it for you. And so there's been development there, and these are also mentioned in the guidelines. But, you know, bread and butter, the McMaster is still a useful technique. It's low cost, and for the most part does quite well. The one challenge we have with McMaster is the multiplication factor that I just talked about. It might not count enough eggs for the fecal egg count reduction test, and so other techniques could be probably better in that regard. But I don't see the egg counts going away anytime soon.
I think that's all we have. I'm not seeing anything else. There is a great job. Thank you so much to you and your team for getting this guidance updated. So I would agree with that comment. So thank you for your time, Martin, today, and we will move on.
Thanks.
Next up, we have Dr. Joe Fish, who was on with us last month, who's going to give us an update to the contagious equine metritis situation in Florida. Take it away, Joe.
Hey, thanks, Katie. For those that did not attend the call, just a very brief recap. May 23rd, 2024, NVSL had the confirmation of the bacterial positive for CEM on a domestic pony in Florida. That mare was bred live cover May 10th to a pony stallion on the same site. The free fluid was was obtained from her uterus and captured in culture, sent. Then on the 31st, we got confirmation from bacterial culture that the stallion that was part of that breeding was also positive. Further down the line, June 12th, we had another 6-year-old positive, or 6-year-old pony stallion from the same premises that was also positive. They had a cool, easy epi link of using shared semen collection equipment 1 day apart in May. So updates for, I think from last call to this call, is there's some geldings in this herd, and one of the geldings that's buddies with one of the positive stallions, he's just their turnout buddy, was confirmed positive. And so this, while it's possible that they caught it through another mechanism, we were also researching the sheath cleaning and practices on the farm. And it looks like there's a decent possibility that he got it from that sheath cleaning at time of dentals and stuff like that. So we are moving to, and actually I think we have already collected the samples on all of the gelding buddies. On the all the little pony geldings have now been tested. I think we are still waiting on those results, but continuing to go out. So to date, we have 2 pony stallions, 1 pony mare, and 1 pony gelding that are all positive from that single premises. The 1 mare that was positive and the initial and the pony stallions have completed treatment, and they either are in the process or have completed the retesting to make sure that they're good to go. Those results, so for the mare, the initial mare, she has come back and it's all negative, and then they need to begin the treatments on her for that second time, and then we'll have 1 down, which will be great. So yeah, a lot more on the dental side, kind of opened some stuff up to some additional positives. We still have the 2 traces from the stallions going out. And those, I know one of them, we found the dam. The dam has been quarantined and tested negative. I will defer to others for updates on traces that are out of Florida, because I don't know that I know the latest on those. And then we may have a link to another shared AV situation that's kind of in development right now. So that's where we stand. I guess that's a kind of a fast summary. I can take questions if people have them.
Joe, are all 4 of those the same strain type? And I'm guessing Angela's going to add more, but.
Oh yeah, you talk strain and I'm out.
Yeah, I can answer that, Katie. So really interesting genetic analysis going on. All the ponies that are infected are definitely related to each other. It is exactly the same strain. They have a few differences. We're looking broader now at this whole genome sequencing, so we can see a lot more, but we have found in the past in looking at these infected horses that they sometimes have multiple colonies that change on the same animal during the time they're infected. So, we're seeing some slight differences there, but they are all connected. The overall genetic analysis that we're finding so far, and we're still trying to dig into this, doesn't match anything we've ever encountered for US outbreaks. And it also doesn't directly match anything in our library that we keep at NVSL. We have many, many samples from all over the world and samples from our previous import positives that we've had, and we don't have a direct match to anything. The closest we have is that this strain, this genetic strain type is in the same clade as a group of samples that the United Kingdom shared with us years ago. So we don't know where they got it. They were testing imports. So we don't really know the origin of those samples that we got from the United Kingdom, but these look like international samples regardless. And again, they're not really closely even related to that, just in the same clade. So something we've never seen before, but definitely confined right now to the 4 positives that we have. And as Joe said, we have a lot more testing and epidemiologic traceback to do as we keep going. So I'll stand by if there are any other questions.
Thanks, Angela. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any in the chat right now. So either unmute yourself or put those in the chat, please. We have no international connection at this time though, right, Angela and Joe?
That's correct. Yeah, we haven't found anything just yet. Again, we do have a lot more testing to do and investigation. The tracebacks that we've done on the positive stallions have yielded them coming from domestic US origin stuff and really unhandled, untrained stuff. One of the ponies that we tested his dam negative, that dam was acquired on Facebook Marketplace and it wasn't even known she was pregnant. So she, we believe that the sire of that particular little pony was another domestic stallion that was either owned or the previous Facebook poster knows who that stallion is. So we may be going back to that if we can figure out all of that. But we're just really not finding a good connection in these pony stallions to them bringing it into the facility. The other pony stallion came from a domestic, essentially owned but feral herd of ponies, where, you know, the father showed ponies years ago. When he passed away, the family members just turned the ponies out on their property. They were never handled again. And that particular pony was an offspring from that herd. That herd has been dispersed and is not available for us to test. And unfortunately, the owner's son, who was responsible for dispersing the herd in 2022, is incarcerated long-term and we cannot get to him. So a lot of really interesting threads going out from this, but none of them are showing anything high risk or any international connection, at least to the pony stallions at this time.
Angela, I've got a couple more. One is any sale barn history on any of these horses?
No, the 2 stallions that we've traced back were acquired through traders, 3 different traders, horse traders involved, but they were specifically sent out to look for white pony stallions for this buyer. So they went and plucked them out and only held them for a couple of days. So really very little, no sale barn activity, horse traders involved, but traders that were looking for a specific type for the ownership that was searching for that type of pony.
Angela, I've got a couple more and then could flies spread the bacteria and what is the environmental persistence?
Yeah, we don't have any evidence that any sort of vector could be involved in contaminating either equipment or animals. That's really not anything that's ever been described in the literature or confirmed in the literature, and that doesn't look like it's part of this process at all. We have very specific handling that's happening with these ponies, and right now the semen collection equipment, the handling of them for breeding, the direct live cover breeding, and the activity involved in their routine sheath cleaning is absolutely part of this process, and that's a confirmed those are confirmed routes of transmission in many of our previous outbreaks and globally in other outbreaks. So we have a good story going. We know the methods by which each of these likely got infected. But as far as the source, that's what we're still searching for. And we're not even fully finished with making sure that we don't have other exposed horses related to this one index farm. So we're working through that.
I think we have another question coming in. Yep, Rusty, we can hear you now.
Okay. No, I was just, were there other mares on the farm besides the mare that?
All of the mares
Mhm.
have been tested. Yep, all of the mares have
Oh.
been tested now, Rusty, because we're using them as the test mares for the
Test
little
mares.
stallions. Yep, so they've all had a full set of cultures and CFs all negative, but yes, all of those pony mares have now been tested negative. It was just that one index mare that got bred on May 10th that received the infection from the little stallion.
Yeah, and then on the semen collection, I'm guessing this is a large facility, handles multiple stallions or not?
No, but the entity that came, the veterinarians in the clinic that came to handle stallions
Yeah.
for the ownership, does do other outside clients. And that's what Joe is talking about, that we're checking, we're pulling appointment books. We're
Yeah.
checking those contacts now.
Yeah, it's interesting, if nothing else.
Yeah, certainly you guys are all thinking along the same lines as we are. You know, we are looking for an international connection. We have not yet reached it. But there's much more for us to do.
Well, we appreciate the efforts.
Thanks, Rusty.
I am not seeing any more questions on my phone or on the chat. So I think at this time, I will say thank you to Joe and Angela. We will ask you on for next month for another update.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Just a couple of announcements from our side. Is Dr. Mike Odian on the line? Dr. Odian.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Flynn. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Just like to let everybody know that there's a new BIA quarantine order going to effect in Pennsylvania on July 13th, that all horses intrastate or interstate must have a Coggins in order to be sold, shown, even given away for any type of sale purposes. So just making everybody aware of that new quarantine order that goes into effect July 13th. And thank you for the opportunity.
No problem. So again, that's Pennsylvania rule going into effect on July 13th that all horses have to have an EIA test negative Coggins for interstate or intrastate movement for show and sale, or even personal sale. Did I summarize that, Dr. Odian, right?
Correct. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right. Thank you, Dr. Odian. Dr. Odian, is there a link that you can give that information?
Not at this time, but if you want to email me, I'd be happy to distribute a copy of the quarantine order for distribution.
Okay. Yep. So I will email Dr. Odian to get the quarantine order, and I will distribute it to this email list.
Sounds good.
All right. I don't see any other questions for that. I do have a couple of announcements. Just to give you some announcements again, if you have any speaker or topic suggestions, please send them my way. Our next call will be on August 8th. And just a couple other updates. The U.S. Animal Health Association Committee on Equine meeting will be on Monday, October 14th at the Gaylord Opryland Hotel. The AAAP meeting is going to be on December 7th to the 11th in Orlando, Florida. Both of those usually have some very good topics for equine health for the groups that are on this call. I thank everyone for our speakers today, and I thank everyone for your participation. And I wish everyone a great day, and we'll talk to you next month, same time. And this recording will be posted to the Equine Disease Communication Center. Thank you and have a great day.